Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 59, recording on Tuesday, February 15th, back in the Minnesota studios. And I've got a question for you guys to start this thing off. What will you feel like? What will your reaction be if on April 27th, the night of April 27th, at the first round of the NFL draft, the Vikings select a running back? How will you feel if that is the pick at number 24? I want to talk about that at the start of this show. So we're going to do that. We're going to hit a bunch of you guys' questions, which I fielded as I usually do early in the week on Twitter/X. I appreciate those who passed along the questions. Got a lot of good stuff. Free agents that Kwesi could look at. Trade conversation a little bit. Some conversation about how this team could free up more cap space. So we will hit all of that. Very Vikings off-season heavy. Looking forward to the conversation. As always, the Alec Lewis Show is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in a local area run by some really great people who are huge Vikings fans. So go check them out at your local branch. They got them all over the place. In fact, they have them at so many places that I said that one of the places was Lino Lakes, which I found out it's now called, it's always been called Lino Lakes, but I just don't know. I didn't know as someone from Birmingham. Please go check out First Resource Bank. All of their information is in the show description, so please go check them out. The running back conversation, let's just hit that from the top. Like I said, I want you to be in the frame of mind. You're sitting on the couch, you're holding a remote, not a remote, you're holding a wet chicken wing in your hand, you're eating pizza, and you hear that little jingle, and it's pick number 24. The Vikings are on the clock. Roger Goodell comes to the podium, and he announces a running back selection. How will you feel if that is the case? Now, you guys are probably responding, well, Alec, I got to know what happens in free agency first. Do they fill the interior of the offensive line spots beforehand? What about the interior of the defensive line? Why would they draft a running back and not interior defensive line? All of those are valid questions. I just think it's interesting to think and put myself into that frame of mind of what happens on Thursday night in the draft if that ultimately is the selection. Part of the reason the conversation surfaced in my mind was because the NFL Network's draft expert, Daniel Jeremiah, who does a phenomenal job, he's worked for teams in the past, he put out his second mock draft on Tuesday morning, and it had the Vikings selecting a running back, Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, who is an electric back. Believe of all the running backs in this draft class, he has the highest explosive play rate among them, meaning of all of them, he's the one that takes the ball the furthest distance the most amount of time, which is a nice weapon to have. It's one of those aspects that Jahmyr Gibbs possessed when the Lions picked him out of Alabama a couple of years ago, and they took a lot of flack for it at the time, but there's no question with their team already having been built the way it had been, it made sense. And that brings us to the Vikings conversation. I've read some of these numbers out to you guys over probably, the end of the season to now, probably in the last month and a half or whatever. But I just, in thinking about running backs and thinking about the run game as a whole, as I am, because the combine's in a week, and I'm going to be in Indianapolis. I'm going to be having conversations with staffers, agents, and head coach Kevin O'Connell, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, all of those folks I will speak with next week in Indianapolis. And one of the subjects that just fascinates me the most is the run game, how it's been, how they view it, how they think it can potentially develop, what that means from a running back perspective. But in my thought process of considering the run game and just evaluating from my own perspective where I believe it was this past season and where it's been the last few years, I went through the numbers again. I mean, the Vikings run game, just in general, they ran the ball on first down a lot, like 7th highest run rate on first down in the NFL. And then it just fell off a cliff on second down, 23rd in run rate on second down. Now, part of me anecdotally providing my own conjecture, why would that be the case? Well, I probably a lot of, 2-yard or 1 yard or 0 yard or negative yard runs on first down. And then if you're a play caller, if you're the head coach, you can attack defenses through the passing game. You probably just you're not going to run it into a brick wall again on second down. But to me, that run rate and just the dispersion of that per down is interesting. Now, just in general, they were 16th in yards per carry, 18th in EPA per rush, 17th in success rate running the football, and then 20th in run DVOA, which is a metric that accounts for strength of schedule. So it's middling to a little below middling was the run game in 2024. Now, I should have pulled up the numbers with Christian Darrisaw or without, but I've done that before, and I'm going to tell you, the numbers it's not massively different with or without Christian Darrisaw. So I just think that's important to note. Now, even further with the run game, what I wanted to talk about was the red zone running. Because, I mean, like you guys know, the teams that are very effective running the football in the red zone, they have a ton of success in the red zone. I'm going to give you the teams that have been most effective running the football in the red zone that were in 2024. And I'm going to do it by EPA. So the Tampa Bay Bucks, they made the playoffs. The Bills, they were very close to making the Super Bowl. The Eagles won the Super Bowl. The Chargers made the playoffs. The Chiefs made the Super Bowl. The Rams, they beat the Vikings. You guys will remember that one. Sorry to bring it up. The Lions had their defense not been decimated by injury, where they'd have probably ended up. So, I mean, like, if you run the football effectively in the red zone, it is a massive advantage. Here's where the Vikings rushing attack was in the red zone in 2024. 31st in success rate. Almost 40% of their runs in the red zone went for 0 or negative yards. That, my friends, is not good at all. They were 30th in the amount of runs that they tried in the red zone, which I understand because they were 31st in EPA running the football in the red zone. It just couldn't run the ball in the red zone at all whatsoever. 40% of the times they tried, it was either a 0 or negative yard gain. And so as I go back to the initial question that I posed to you at the top of this podcast, I mean, the idea of having a trusty running game that would work in the red zone, that would take pressure off the quarterback, specifically if it's a rookie quarterback in J.J. McCarthy. I mean, it's just it's overwhelmingly massive. And then Kevin O'Connell and this staff always talks about wanting to play the game. They want to play it on their terms. And if you can run the football, it helps the other sides. Now, the question within that, I mean, you guys will agree with me in that. And the staff would agree with me 100% as well, and have in conversations that I've had with them. But the question is, like, what is the running back's value in that versus offensive line versus scheme? I mean, there are just so many, like, if I think of what makes successful football within the run game specifically, if you made like a pie chart, I mean, it's hard to separate how much value of a successful running game is on the running back, is on the offensive line, is on the scheme, is on the passing game, helping the running game. There's just so many factors that go into the run game. But, I mean, there's no question. I mean, you go back to, let's just go the 3 years I've covered this team. Aaron Jones as a running back. He was not able to be his full optimal self probably all the time. I mean, not even close to all the time. He played every game, but you and I both know, watching him, there were times where it looked like he had more bursts, and there were times where it did not. I mean, last year, Alexander Mattison, the idea in trying to have Alexander Mattison at the running back was that he would be efficient. Well, he really couldn't generate much. Now, the offensive line wasn't great, but Alexander Mattison had very little burst, and it showed with the Raiders' run game this year. And then the year before, Dalvin Cook, and Dalvin, I mean, he definitely, the explosiveness had fallen off a little bit, but he also, I mean, was a guy who it was either boom or bust. It was either the 65-yard screen to the house or it was negative runs. The Vikings, I believe, led the NFL in 2022 in the percentage of runs for 0 or negative yards. And so, I mean, there's no question that an upgrade at running back it exists with who the Vikings have had. And I got to tell you, I mean, I've spent the last month watching a lot of these draft prospects because while I read the Daniel Jeremiahs and the Dane Bruglers who writes for us at The Athletic, I think it's incumbent upon me to at least have a feel when I'm talking about these guys when I'm writing about them, how they look. I've also reached out to people in the industry that I know to ask their feelings about these specific guys. One AFC evaluator said to me, go watch Omarion Hampton and like really spend the time. Omarion Hampton, for you guys who don't know, it was a North Carolina running back, and this guy is incredibly impressive. I've heard other NFL draft people say like he's Joe Mixon-ish, and that's like the mold of what this Vikings team should probably seek if they really want to maximize their run game, in terms of a guy who, he's built enough to push in the red zone, but he's also athletic enough in open space to get you yardage. I mean, I could rattle off a ton of guys. Caleb Johnson at Iowa, he's very impressive. I watched Trevor Etienne at Georgia. I spoke about him last episode. I think he's really impressive. Tennessee's Dylan Sampson. That guy was huge for Tennessee's success this past year. He ran the ball a lot. He's not the biggest guy, but like pretty good vision and feel. Damian Martinez at Miami, RJ Harvey at UCF. I mean, you could go on, and it's not Cam Scatterbo at Arizona State. Again, you can go on and on and on, and these guys aren't just like late round. I mean, no, these are talents who potentially could be starting running backs in the NFL. So I will say the fact that the Vikings push back Aaron Jones' void date means that they are interested in bringing back Aaron Jones. And I've said this on the past, that I believe that to be the case. I said that last week. It wouldn't surprise me if he's back. Now, the question is going to be, what is the number that he and his representatives with Drew Rosenhaus being the primary agent, what are they seeking? And how far are the Vikings willing to go, knowing that they only have 4 picks right now in the draft? It's a very good question. And as I come back to the initial conversation, I asked you guys, how would you feel? I mean, again, so much of it is going to be predicated on what they do in free agency. There's no question about how that will affect the response potentially to what it would look like if they drafted a running back in the first round. But I mean, if you really believe, as I watch this Omarion Hampton guy at a UNC, if he's there and the Vikings, at 24 and the Vikings aren't picking again until the third round, I could get it either way. If you're like, this guy's a no-brainer, he's got the second most runs of 4 yards after contact in college football last year behind Ashton Jeanty. He's been consistent for multiple years now, and we just can't pass up on a guy like this. And we already fortified our interior offensive line and added an interior defensive line, Pete. Then you could talk yourself into it, in my opinion. But I'm curious because I just want to get a feel for what you guys would feel like that. I've been on record on this podcast for a month now of saying, for me, this offseason, I know it's going to be, and it also has to be, about the trenches. I have talked to people internally already, and we haven't even gotten to the combine. And I'm telling you, the focus of this offseason from inside that building is going to be transforming this team into one that can generate verticality on both sides of the line of scrimmage. That's just going to be the reality. And I've covered this team for 3 years. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that it has to be the reality. They have not drafted a first-round defensive lineman on the interior since 2013, being Sharif Floyd. Not to make you guys feel young, but I was a junior in high school in 2013. It's just absolutely absurd. And so if there is an interior defensive lineman available at number 24 or late in the first round that the Vikings like, whether it's a TJ Sanders, whether it's a Walter Nolan, the list can go on because there's a lot of those guys in this draft. And if those guys are available, they like them, and they choose a running back, and they still have a hole at that spot, that's going to be pretty tough. So we're talking about. I bring it up because I want to hear what you guys think. So whether it's the YouTube comments and you're watching over there, please let me know. I'm very curious. Whether it's Apple, Spotify, there's ways on there. And if you just want to let me know your thoughts on Twitter, I am open to listening because, I always think that you guys who listen to this show and read my stuff have a pretty good feel. Might not know everything, might not have all the details, might not get to talk to people internally, but the feel, I think, is very good and very warranted. So that's where I wanted to start. And now we'll get to a lot of you guys' questions. So I made some notes on here of the types of stuff that I wanted to hit. And we will start if I can find my list of questions, which I will be able to very, very quickly, we are going to start with the free agents that Kwesi could target. The question comes from, let me find it right here. Ben from MN at Low Energy Ben. He asks, who are some free agents you think Kwesi will target? So the obvious route that I could go is some of the big names, the top 50 guys that you see everywhere, right? That would be pretty easy. I could name the Milton Williams and the Trey Smiths and the Osa Odigbuza from the Cowboys. I mean, I could be pretty obvious and clear with that. But I wanted to give 5 names of guys that fit the profile of the types of player that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in this front office have signed in the last 3 years. The themes among them, I'll just tell you right now, are younger players, so not really over that 30-year-old hill. I mean, if you think about Byron Murphy, if you think about Jonathan Grenard, if you think about Blake Cashman, even Harrison Phillips when they signed him in 2022, most of these guys have been under 30 years old and not over the cliff that the sample size of data over the course of time would say. Once you hit a certain age, you start to fall off. Like I've said this on the podcast before, and I've written it as well. But Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, a lot of his preparation for this general manager role came from studying age curves. And age curves can best be summed up by, data that produces analysis on the curve at which a player's prime starts to kind of tail off. Think of it like a U curve or a roller coaster going up and coming down. I mean, that's a lot of how he analyzed players as he rose the ranks to this role. Aligns with some of that stuff. Some of the other themes with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah signing, he has not been afraid to sign guys who have been injured. And you guys might be rolling your eyes. God, why do we keep doing? I mean, but the reality is, this past year, Jonathan Grenard had been injured in the past. He had a freaking great year. Blake Cashman had been crazy injured in the past. He also had a great year. Andrew Van Ginkel had previous injuries. Phenomenal year. So I mean, yes, there are the Marcus Davenports, but Byron Murphy Jr. was also a guy who had been hurt in previous years that they took the chance on. So that's a theme. And then the other aspect is just guys who aren't at the top of the market. I mean, you guys know this. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's background is in commodity trading, and you're trying to ensure that you are purchasing in that aspect, commodities at the right price and selling off them at the wrong price. And a lot of it is forecasting and predictions. And so I think you don't want to buy any person who's trading at that level. You don't want to buy at the premium top of the market. So those are the 3 themes that I wrote down these players in. Young, if it's injury risk, that doesn't scare me off a ton. And then not buying at the premium, area of the market. So here are the 5. First and foremost, cornerback who played for Washington this past year, Noah Igbagni. Brian Flores drafted him in 2019 in Miami. If you go look right now at the PFF grades of Noah Igbagni, you're probably like, why would they? But, he's a long, fast cornerback who can play on the outside. Is he going to give up deep balls? Potentially. Does he have the best ball tracking skills? Probably not. But could he come at an inexpensive cost and allow some man coverage to be played for this defense? I think so. Second player is a defensive back. I don't really know in terms of fit. He's succeeded as like a slot cornerback a little bit. But part of me thinks is like if Byron Murphy Jr. And the Vikings cannot come to terms and Byron Murphy leaves in free agency. I mean, this guy, he had a pretty good year in Los Angeles. Elijah Molden with the Chargers. He's not the biggest guy, like 5'10", 190 pounds, but pretty solid in coverage. He's a free agent. He's interesting. This guy, a lot of people listening probably know pretty well. He was an interior defender with the Lions. I think he had 9 pressures in the Week 18 game that the Vikings lost because they couldn't score in the red zone, and I can't stop thinking about it somehow for some reason. But Levi Onwuzurike, he's nowhere near the Milton Williams level or Osa Ogbuza from the Cowboys in terms of interior defender, pass rusher. But he might be gettable at a less expensive cost. And he, size wise, he can move around. He's like 6'3", 290. So just an interesting player. The fourth, Greg Dortch, I think as a potential punt returner / ancillary receiver, that one would not surprise me at all. And then an interesting one for me, the previous New Orleans Saints cornerback Paulson Adebo, who broke his femur this past year, but had been, I think he was a 3rd-round pick a few years ago, and has been effective in man coverage. The Saints played that type of style under Dennis Allen. So those are the 5 within that question that was asked by Ben, just about free agents that Kwesi could target. Those are 5 that come to mind. They're a little bit out there. They're not as obvious, but that's where my mind went when I received that question and did some due diligence on it. Let's see. Gary Stankum asked, are there any players on this team you could see getting traded for picks in this draft? I see a couple rumors surrounding Hockenson and Grenard. There's rumors all over the place, and they're called rumors for a reason, because I don't believe the Vikings are going to part with either of those guys. The first thing I would say, just to address that, is, you to trade TJ Hockenson, you'd be taking on almost $18 million in dead money, and you would lose money on the cap. If you post-June cut him, then you'd save around $11 million. But I like Kevin O'Connell, I really believe wants to reintegrate Hockenson this upcoming year. He's still 28 years old. He'll be another year removed from the ACL. Do I think he is the most, contested catch, and do I think he's a great run blocking tight end? No, I do not on either of those. He's being paid a premium. There's no question about it. And I just don't know if another team would want to take that on at this point, to be frank with you. And then Jonathan Grenard, the production just it's not even remotely a question, but this guy, I feel like he is a fixture for years to come on this defense, being that he is himself still only 28 years old. Trading him, you take on a lot of dead money. You could save some, but this defense needs good players at this point. Does not need to eliminate them. I tossed this question in some form over to a couple people just because I was curious what people would say. A couple agents, not team people, and I had an agent come back to me, and he was like, I wonder what you could get for Dallas Turner. And it was an interesting thought process. And it wasn't, this is a classic, I hope people understand, like in the business all the time, you throw out ideas, you have conversations. It's interesting to think about. Dallas Turner, I'm sure, was high on a lot of teams' draft boards. There wasn't enough sample size of seeing him play that I think anybody would be concerned. I just know watching him, and from the athleticism standpoint to just, I do think he genuinely really wants it. It'd be interesting. You get back a year of the rookie contract. Could you get a 1st-round pick or multiple pick? Would this regime, given the lack of success in the draft, be willing to do that? I'd probably say no, but it was an interesting thought process and just thought experiment. And when you start to think about like who would bring back picks in this present draft that other teams would be interested in. It's kind of hard to find guys who make a ton of sense. So it was just an interesting thought bubble that I hope does not get aggregated as something that's real. It just made me think a little bit. But yeah, that's the answer to that question. Not a ton is the reality. Let's get to this next question. I appreciated this one. This comes from Eric Hansen, Hans Farms. He reads and listens to the podcast, and I'm grateful for you, Eric. Appreciate it as always. What are some internal moves, restructures, trades, cuts you think Minnesota would or should make to clear up more cap space? So the obvious starting point here is Ed Ingram at right guard. I mean, Ed Ingram was benched week 11 for Dalton Reisner. If this team is as serious as they sound about revamping the interior offensive line, it's hard for me to see a future for Ed Ingram and as a starter. And then, I mean, as depth, would you rather be paying the $3.7 million cap number or have some of that money in space? And I will say, and this gets in pretty in the weeds, but Ed Ingram's cap number right now is $3.7 million. Because of the amount of snaps he's played over his first 3 years, he could be owed a performance escalator that could increase that number and increase the amount that the Vikings save. So that's one way that you create probably about $4 million in cap space. The second thing I kind of want to touch on, because it's been something that a couple of people have talked about in terms of cap space and accounting. But so Harrison Smith, his contract is due to void kind of in the middle of March. I mean, the first question obviously is, does he want to keep playing? If he does, then, like the contract looks as if, like if you just read the contract, all that you would owe for next season would be a base salary of $1.255 million. That's not really the reality. Just after talking to some people, the reason it is structured that way with that base salary number at $1.255 million is that in the event he does retire, then the Vikings could post-June cut and say it would really help their accounting and their cap space and their books in a way. But it's also kind of structured to where if Harrison does decide to return, the underlining aspect of it is they would renegotiate that number a good bit. So what I would say is, like, I think right now in Over the Cap, which is a website that a lot of people use to kind of analyze where a team is with its cap space, because his contract is set to void, it's kind of like his $9.5 million dead cap money is on the cap. I would say the Vikings would probably have some more space than that after negotiating his 2025 salary. And so that would be, to answer Eric's question, that's another option. I mean, the other, one of the other players that I think their contract is interesting, and I mean, this would be very in the weeds conversations with the team to really think about where the route they would go with it. But I mean, Brian O'Neill as the highest cap number on this Vikings roster at about 26 million. Brian O'Neill, I thought he had a really good year. Was he great against the Rams in the playoff game? Not phenomenally. Did he? I think he got concussed in that game. He's 30 years old. There are a lot of routes this could go. He's not guaranteed. His contract is not guaranteed really moving forward. So could you restructure it? Could you extend him? There's probably an avenue with Brian O'Neill, who has just been a stalwart leader for Kevin O'Connell since Kevin got here, and just key voice inside the locker room. There's probably a route that you could take to lower that cap number in 2025. Now, how that would look, whether it's a restructure where you're converting salary money to a signing bonus or whether it's an extension. He hasn't received an extension, I don't think, since 2021. Again, he is 30 years old, so paying a 30-year-old a ton of money, it's probably not Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's priority, but a guy who means as much as Brian O'Neill does, it creates an interesting conversation. And then, the reality is his $26 million cap number at right tackle is the fourth highest cap number among right tackles in the NFL. Is Brian O'Neill a top 5 right tackle in the NFL? That's a conversation that I'd need a lot of analysis on, but he's another guy that comes to mind. Some other ancillary stuff that could create some more cap room. And Brian Asamoah, that's one of them. I mean, Garrett Bradbury, that's another one. I've said this before, but Josh Metellus, an extension for him or some restructure with him. Josh Oliver, he's in the same boat. Andrew Van Ginkel, you could restructure. There's a lot of ways they could create enough cap. So yeah, I appreciate the question, Eric. It's going to be interesting to see how they do it. And they have one of the best in the business doing it with Rob Brzezinski. Let's see here. Next question comes from Jake Hansen. Jake might be related to Eric. Who knows? He's asking, should we fill the offensive defensive line in free agency or draft around it, or vice versa? I think it has to be free agency, specifically for the interior of the offensive line. And the reason I answer that is, I mean, at this point, to absorb more risk in that position group in terms of, well, we hope this works out. I mean, like I've written this, but they hoped it worked out with Ed Ingram and Ezra Cleveland. It didn't. They traded Ezra Cleveland. They brought in Dalton Risner. They hoped it worked out with Blake Brandel at left guard and Ed Ingram at right guard. It didn't. They had to bench Ed Ingram. They added in Dalton Risner at right guard. I mean, and the Blake Brandel experiment at left guard he was fine at best. And so for me, at this point, specifically on the interior of the offensive line, making sure that you have proven players who have done it before, who can step in and pass protect and provide you multiple options in the run game. To ensure that is the case as this thing moves forward, specifically on the interior of the offensive line, I think that's huge. Now, I will also say, like I've had a lot of people toss out to me, what else in free agency makes sense? What about DJ Reed at cornerback? Like, yeah, that definitely makes sense. But I think adding some kind of interior defensive line piece in free agency also makes sense. And it doesn't mean you don't draft an interior defensive lineman in the first round if you add a Levi Onwuzurike or an Osa from the Cowboys or Milton Williams or Tershawn Wharton from the Chiefs. I mean, I think doing both to me makes a lot of sense, but I really wouldn't be surprised if they were to add some kind of interior defensive line piece via free agency, even before the draft. So that's what I just feel very strongly that you can't draft for need the needs have to be filled with the space that they have. That's just how I feel. Question from Alex Draft. Do you see the Vikings promoting within for the open position for director of player performance? So if you guys missed it, Joe Person, who's one of my favorites that we have at The Athletic, he covers the Carolina Panthers. He reported that Josh Hinks, who has been the director of player performance underneath Tyler Williams or alongside Tyler Williams in the Vikings athletic performance department, he was taking a similar job with the Carolina Panthers. Now, a lot of people ask me, when that news surfaced, like, how does that happen? I'd say it does make you ask the question, like, are the Wilfs maximizing the amount of money they're spending on the staff? And that's a huge thing. I mean, the staff members know how much people in comparable roles get elsewhere, and you want to make those people, not guys, those people feel very good about the place they're working. The facility can be great, the food can be great, the environment can be great, but as we all know in life, like, there is a monetary aspect that plays a role into comfort. And so that I think it's a question worth asking. And in terms of answering Alex, I mean, they have good staffers in that department. Derek Keys, Marquise Johnson, Dan Ridenour, those guys have relationships with the players. They're out at practice. They're in the building every day. Wouldn't surprise me if one of those guys is promoted. If it's an external hire, it'd be hard for me to have an inkling on what that looks like, other than probably someone, Tyler Williams, who is a VP with this team as kind of the, not like the czar of player health and performance, unless it's someone who has a relationship with him previously. It's kind of, it'd be interesting. Next question from Dustin Roberts, who I always appreciate. Do you think it is time that the Vikings move on from offensive line coach Chris Cooper and hire an O-line coach who is also a run game coordinator? I mean, what I would say is I'm not there in that I think it's got Chris Cooper. Like, no. I mean, Chris Cooper was a first-time offensive line coach. He'd been an assistant, I believe, before he arrived. I believe he'd been an assistant in Denver. He learned from one of the best in Mike Munchak. I've had multiple conversations with Chris. I'm not sure he's like the most electric guy, but I mean, offensive lineman, you know, and I believe in Denver, kind of the culture was that there wasn't a lot of media interaction in that regard. I do think, I mean, at times this offensive line has exceeded kind of, for lack of a better term, like the what you're paying those guys. I think their performance has matched or if not exceeded that group. Now Ed Ingram hasn't developed incredibly well as a pass protector, but I would question whether he ever had kind of the football intelligence to be, you know, if that was possible. And when I say football intelligence, I'm talking spatial awareness on the field, ability to, you know, like intuitively adopt coaching and implement it in the next drill. It has nothing to do with actual intelligence, just like football, you know, cognitive ability on the field. That's where I would wonder if that prevented certain developmental options. And then to your point, Dustin, I mean, the run game coordinator has been Curtis Modkins. I mean, more than anything, like I think you can talk coaches and could they use another person who is very well versed in the run game? Absolutely. And that'll be interesting to find out at the combine or leading up to it what the plans are or aren't in that regard. But until like it is a commitment from the play caller and Kevin O'Connell that this is something that I care about as much, you know, close to the passing game. And I think you could talk about title changes, coaching, all that stuff, but it has to be the play caller being receptive and supplying real like resources in terms of time, thought, and all that into it. And do I think Kevin O'Connell has that in him and will want to go there? I do, because I think he's an aware enough guy. But until it hits that point, I think a lot of the conversation about offensive line, to me, it's kind of like when I cover the Kansas City Royals. A lot of people complained all the time about the pitching coach, and and he kept his job. But I mean, for me, it was always beyond the pitching coach. The philosophy from the very top did not create the culture to develop optimal pitchers. So until that philosophy was chipped away at or changed or committed to in a different way, it really didn't even matter who the pitching coach was. So that's how I'll answer that one. Next question comes from Jay Money. Update on the coaching changes on the Viking staff. So, I mean, yeah, if you guys aren't aware, Grant Udinski, who is the assistant quarterbacks coach, took the OC job in Jacksonville working with Liam Cohen. And I'll be very interested to see what he does alongside Trevor Lawrence. Sean Starrett, who is the assistant offensive line coach, went with Grant Udinski. We'll see what happens with Durante Jones, who interviewed recently for the New Orleans Saints defensive coordinator job under Kellen Moore. I'll be interested to see. I mean, like before last season, the Vikings pass rush specialist Mike Smith stepped away for personal reasons. They never really replaced that role. It was filled by Mike Pettin and Amar'e Arbery. And Amar'e's a young coach, has coached at the Senior Bowl. But I'll be interested to see if there's anything there. And then filling the assistant quarterbacks coach job is interesting with Josh McCown. How they go about doing that is something that I expect to find out over the next week or so. Next question comes from Carl Johnson. Why are coaches' contracts not publicized with the same transparency as players? So often we either never hear what the term and dollars are for coaches. Have you heard anything on the length of KOC's contract? Or are we waiting for Kwesi deal to drop? I'll start by answering the first part. I think there could be a couple reasons that the coaches' contracts aren't publicized. One, I mean, from the owner perspective, I mean, the more you're aware of what the contracts are publicly, the more I think the market is obvious, and the more you probably have people externally pushing for that market to climb. I mean, I always think about this. Like, if you're paying a quarterback $60 million a year, what's a great coach worth? I mean, is it not? I mean, is it? I mean, I'd say in the NFL, a great coach is worth a freaking heck of a lot. And so, I mean, the fact that we don't, you hear all the time, like, top of the market for a head coach in the NFL is around 20 million. It's interesting. I think the other aspect is it could be an agent thing where, the agents, they have a bunch of a lot of these coaching agents have a lot of clients, and so to get something for one client, you probably have questions from other clients. So you're wading into a lot of different areas there. As far as Kevin O'Connell's deal, from what it sounds like, it's multiple seasons on top of next year. Multiple is I'm leaving that opaque for a reason, but he will be here for some time, and that being Kevin O'Connell. Let's see here. Next question from Nick Miller, the always trusty. He says, great article. Since you talked about the Darnold scenarios, could you put a percentage on each of them happening? So I wrote for Tuesday a story about the options with Sam Darnold, breaking it up into 4 categories: signing him to a multi-year extension, signing him to a franchise tag, signing him to a transition tag, and letting him walk and hit free agency. The most likely was letting him walk and hit free agency. I'd say that's probably around 55%. The franchise tag or transition tag was next. I think that's probably like 20%. Franchise tag after that, probably 20%. And then that leaves 5% for a multi-year extension. And that's as I'm speaking today. If things change, things change. It's a fluid industry. So that does it. But my feel is that, unless it becomes pretty clear on 2 facets, either JJ McCarthy's health is not what it sounds like it is right now, which is in good shape, or another team is very willing to trade draft picks for Sam Darnold's services to where a franchise tag makes sense. Letting him walk and hit free agency seems like the path. Let's see. Last question comes from Brad Vikes. What do you think the percentage chance is that we trade the 24th pick? So it's funny because at The Athletic, we're doing a beat writer mock draft where all of our beat writers make picks. And I was trying to trade down from 24 because I need extra picks for this draft. If I'm the Vikings, 4 is not enough. And nobody would do it with me. I couldn't get our Bills guy to do it. Our Commanders guy wouldn't do it. Our Chiefs guy wouldn't do it. Our Eagles guy goes to me. He's probably still celebrating the Super Bowl. But I will say, like, teams like Houston, Detroit, Washington, Buffalo, Kansas City, Philly, they've been willing to move in the draft in the past and move up. And so if there's a player they prefer who's available at 24, that might make sense. I'd also just say, like, I care a lot about surplus value and picks and all, but like the Vikings need impact players. There is no substitute for impact players. Now, I say that there's no guarantee any player you pick at 24 is going to be an impact player. In fact, the odds are probably 40% that it's going to happen. But this team needs impact players right now with where they're at. So trading back, the value would have to really be there. At this point, I think Adofo-Mensah, this Viking staff, has learned in 2022 that trading back only makes sense if the value that you're generating is correct. And when you do that, you are placing yourself subject to criticism. Now, there are times where I think criticism can be taken on more than others. Like if you're Bill Belichick and you've 1-1-1, trading back and being criticized for taking a small school guy, you don't really care. But if the draft is going to predicate or dictate your job security or anything like that, you got to be mindful of certain things. So we'll see how that goes, but that'll do it for the question portion of the equation. How will you feel if the Vikings draft a running back in the first round? Let me know in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, hit the like. That stuff helps us out a ton. I appreciate you guys being here. We're going to be back later in the week with one of my favorites who writes and studies the draft. So looking forward to that. And then next week we'll be in Indy at the Combine. A lot coming down the pipe. The show goes on. Thank you guys for being here. This is episode 59 of the Alec Lewis Show.